Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and welcome to part one of my SpecDACular, where I will compare and contrast a bunch of mid-fi DACs, right? And we'll define mid-fi as being between roughly 500 and 1,000 US dollars. This is going to be part one where we look at single-ended DACs, and so we'll talk about why single-ended DACs are important, why they are still necessary in the market, and their advantages and their disadvantages as part of this video. And then we're going to get into the comparison itself. And honestly, there are limited options in this category at this price. So the ones that we have to look at today are going to be the Cord Mojo 2. This is 650 US dollars. We'll also talk about the Socris dac1421. This is 750 US dollars. And then we'll also talk about the Black Ice Audio Glass FX, which is 900 US dollars. I have reviewed each of these three pieces individually, and so I will put links in the description down below where you can watch those videos and see all of the relevant disclaimers and all of that. Because I already have those out there, I'm not going to spend the time repeating them here. So stay around here for shameless self-promotion, and then we'll come back on the other side and we will start digging into why single-ended DACs are still important, and then how these three compare to each other, and then some general thoughts about where they fit into the broader DAC market when you talk about balanced DACs too, between 500 and 1,000 US dollars. All right, let's get to it.
Hi, I'm Wave Theory's human companion, and he wants you to know that your support of this YouTube channel helps keep the reviews coming. If you enjoy Wave Theory's honest, thorough style, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the links in the description below to sign up for the Patreon or send him a tip through PayPal. All right, enjoy the musings.
If you've been following my channel for any real length of time here, you know that I've been harping on the imbalance, in the market between single-ended and balanced DACs under $1,000. And I think that's even more true between 500 and 1,000 US dollars here, because many entry-level DACs are, or true entry-level DACs are single-ended. So what's going on with that? Why is that? And then why should we not just ignore single-ended DACs? Like, why do I think that we need more options in them, even though these three are quite good? And if you've heard me say all of this before because you've followed the channel, go ahead and check out the timestamps below and just skip over this part and get to the parts that you want to watch. If you're new to this channel and you haven't heard me say all of this before, first of all, please subscribe. And secondly, just give me a moment here to kind of explain and defend why single-ended DACs are just, we need more of them. At least I think we need more of them at this price point. Okay, real quick rundown. I have a written description of kind of the general differences, not the super roll up the sleeves and get into the ins and outs of the circuits and how the electricity is behaving and all of that I wrote for Hi-Fi Guides forum back about 3 or 4 years ago now. And so I will put a link down to that down in the description. So I don't want to spend a ton of time in this video here talking about exactly what a balanced DAC is versus what a single-ended DAC is, other than to say very generally that a balanced DAC kind of separates the left and the right channels from each other. They're kind of like it's slightly separate circuit paths. And so what ends up happening in a balanced DAC then is, like, particularly when you get to the output stage and that sort of thing, is that you need two of everything. You need two sets of either op amps or transistors or something like that to boost the signal coming out of a DAC chip or out of a resistor ladder or that sort of thing up to line level so that you can feed it to an amplifier or a preamplifier or that sort of thing. Okay, if you're talking about a resistor ladder DAC or an R2R DAC, then if you're in a fully balanced design, you need two resistor ladders to go along with that. So what comes along with a balanced DAC then is often you need twice the number of parts as you do a single-ended DAC. And this is where single-ended DACs can have a real advantage, because with a balanced DAC, you have roughly twice the number of parts. So what that means is that at a given price, more parts means that you have to buy lesser expensive parts. With a single-ended design, fewer parts at a fixed price point means that you can buy more expensive and usually, therefore, better parts. electrical components that are more quickly reactive and responsive to the changing AC signals that are musical signals and that sort of thing. Okay, so as far as raw sound quality goes at a given price point, in theory, a single-ended DAC should sound better than a balanced DAC. Okay. Now, does that always work out? No, because there's a lot of variables and all of that going on there. But at least in theory, single-ended DACs are starting from a point of sonic advantage because of that part count and the cost per part that I just talked about. Okay, now, balanced designs, however, are better at rejecting external noise. Okay, and so one of the reasons, I think anyway, that our hobby here has become imbalanced in favor of balanced DACs is because over about the past couple of decades, it has become more and more common to put computers into the signal path and use computers or computing devices as the source gear for digital audio files. Prior to that, physical media dominated, okay? And we're talking about vinyl or CD or things of that nature and all of that, which could be single-ended and all of that from the get-go. And so there were, more single-ended options proportionally then around this price point, okay, back in those days. Now, the reason that a balanced design helps when you have like a computer as an audio source playing audio files is because computers are inherently noisy devices. You've got all kinds of circuits in there going every which way, and particularly if it's something like a gaming computer where you have one of those big beefy graphics cards in there to power modern video games and all of that. Like, they just get a lot of electrical noise and a lot of electrical interference going on within them that often bleeds into the audio signal path. Balanced DACs, particularly connected via something like USB, are much better at filtering out that kind of noise than a single-ended DAC is. So, to some degree, it makes sense that for home audio, balanced DACs have become more popular and are now dominating the options at this price point. However, I think the tide might be turning on that slightly. It's not going to completely, but where with streamers now coming into the market, okay, and more popular and all of that. So what streamers do then is they can cut out that noisy computer or computing device from your signal chain. And then single-ended DACs become a better option there because we're not worrying about having to have that noise rejection. Streamers are usually inherently much quieter sources with a much lower noise floor than computers or other computing devices. Okay. So that's a little bit about how we got here and where single-ended DACs can have at least one advantage. Another advantage of the single-ended DAC is because there are fewer parts inside, there's lower risk of internal noise generation. So they, again, in theory, once you take care of and account for the external noise, okay, and filter that out, single-ended DACs, again, in theory, not always in practice, but in theory can have a lower inherent noise floor because there's less electrical stuff inside the box there to interfere and all of that kind of thing. Okay. What has also happened in the DAC market here, particularly under $1,000, although this particular aspect can also affect DACs that are much more expensive, is that when a DAC is designed to be balanced, it is optimized to perform using its balanced nature. Okay, so in other words, to create the single-ended output of a balanced DAC requires some degree of electrical jiggering. Balanced line-level outputs tend to be higher voltage than single-ended outputs, and they also carry the ground on a third conductor, whereas single-ended only has two conductors. So there's the dual problem there from going from an inherently balanced output and downstepping it to a single-ended output, that you've got to reduce the voltage and take care of that grounding issue in there. And the result of that, almost always to my ears anyway, is a reduction in things like soundstage size, resolution, and some dynamic impact. Okay, Under $1,000 US, I have not heard a truly balanced DAC sound as good from its single-ended output as it does from its balanced output. So there's kind of a twofold problem here then, again, looking at the big picture of the market. And that is that the market has become unbalanced in the favor of balanced DACs. Okay, so there's just a ton more options of those out there right now than there are single-ended. Okay. And then on top of that, those balanced DACs just simply do not perform as well sonically from their single-ended outputs as they do their balanced outputs. Okay, so then why is that also significant? Well, if you're on the headphone side of this hobby, there are a lot of headphone amplifiers and preamps and all of that out there that are still single-ended only. Just in my collection, I have things like the KN-HA1A Mark II tube amp, which is single-ended only. I have the Erzatich Perfidus headphone amplifier, single-ended only. I have an original Shit Saga preamp, single-ended only. My 2-channel system has an older, a vintage Adcom GFA 555 Mark II stereo amplifier in it, and that has single-ended only connections on it as well. Now, it goes beyond that because it doesn't take very long to name a bunch of devices that have single-ended only connections here in the headphone hobby. Rebel amp out there, single-ended only. Dark Voice 336SE, Bottlehead Crack, Hagerman Audio Labs Tuba, Felix Echo, okay, bunch of tube amps in there just to name a few. Hybrids like the Shitliar Plus, okay, I have the Garage 1217 Project Ember right here, okay, single-ended only. If you're into speakers, okay, that's scratching the surface there. If you're into speakers in 2-channel in this price range, it's single-ended to a lot higher degree on that side of the hobby than it is on the headphone side of the hobby. So there's still a need for single-ended DACs around this price point, and hopefully this has been a rather concise breakdown as to why these single-ended DACs are necessary and why these three that I'm about to talk about are so important. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and then turn to the comparison of these three DACs. When it comes to these three DACs here, and again, we have on top here the Chord Mojo 2, in the middle, the Socris DAC1421, and then on the bottom, the Glass FX from Black Ice Audio. When it comes to these three, I want to say a couple of things right up front, that when it comes to sonics, okay, there is not a bad choice to be made here. All three of these DACs sound wonderful. They all sound different, but they all have some very real sonic strengths to them and very limited sonic drawbacks to them. And so as far as just pure sound goes, talking about sound quality, take a deep breath. There is not a bad choice to be made here. The other thing that I want to stress is that I'm just one reviewer, right? Please do not take just my word for how these stack up with each other or how they stack up to the balanced DAC offerings that are between 500 and 1,000 USD as well. Look around the internet, get a bunch of opinions, and then use this video as just one data point as you make a decision for yourself and what is best for your needs, your tastes, and your system. Okay, real quick rundown of each of these. And again, I have a review of each of these individually up, and so please see the description down below where you can watch more detail about this. The Mojo 2, again, $650 US, and what's unique about this one in this trio is that it is a transportable device, which is small enough that you can reasonably comfortably use it as an on-the-go unit. Now, it also is still like at home being a desktop or 2-channel system DAC as well. Now, the one drawback to that, okay, if you choose to use it in a desktop or speaker-based setup, is that there is no manual input switching on this. It has several different inputs. It has USB, it has optical, and it has mini coaxial here inside this little 3.5 millimeter jack here. Okay, and those are all set up on a hierarchy. So they, I think USB comes first and then the dual coax maybe. Anyway, I don't remember exactly the order, but it will automatically switch to whichever input has a signal on it, and if there are multiple inputs with signal, there's a hierarchy in terms of which one it's going to select first. So if you're using this in a desktop / 2-channel setup and you have multiple digital sources you want to run through this, keep in mind that you may have to manually switch your cabling in order to really use this in here. Now, another unique advantage to this one is that it also has some built-in equalization that the other two don't, and it's fairly robust and flexible in that equalization. So if you are a fan of EQ and all of that, like, that's another good option. For a device that can go on the go and be transportable, I think that's actually a nice feature, because usually when you're traveling and on the go, you might only have one set of headphones and or one set of IEMs that you're taking with you. And that one set may not sound great for every single thing you want to listen to, but could be improved to some with built-in EQ. And since it has built-in EQ, that works well and I think is a nice feature here. Also, the headphone amp in this is actually fairly decent for the price and all of that. So what you get here in terms of use cases is really unique in this trio. And this one is the most flexible device, I would say, of these three, because of its ability to go transportable / on the go. And you can connect it to its a matching poly streamer, also from Cord, which I have not reviewed or heard, but I can link to down below where you can buy that if you wish. Okay, but I say that because, like, if you're on a limited budget, if you're getting into audio and you want to step up your DAC game, but you're in a situation where it's like, I'm a believer in higher quality audio now, and I want to be able to listen to my music both at home and on the road, okay, with reasonable quality, and I've got some headphones or some IEMs that I like that I can take with me, and then I have, you know, a nice, I've got a tube amp maybe, I've got a bottle head crack and an HD 650 or whatever here at home that I like to listen to, that sort of thing. Like, this can really become a compelling option, because for $650 US, you have a very capable on-the-go and very good sounding, like, transportable on-the-go solution, and also a very competent and capable desktop or 2-channel solution in one $650 US package. Okay, so as far as like use cases and ergonomics go, there's really a lot to like about this one, and we'll get to sound comparisons here in a little bit more detail in a bit, but it also sounds very good in this small, durable, and again, fairly reasonably priced package. Okay. The dac1421 here from Socrus, at least in terms of like use cases and features and all of that, this is an R2R DAC. It's the only R2R DAC in this grouping here. All right, but it doesn't necessarily have the stereotypical sound of an R2R DAC. Like, it's a little bit more aggressive and forward in its presentation. So it has some elements of like the stereotypical Delta Sigma sound. This is one of those DACs, though, where I personally start to get a little bit uncomfortable when we start using terms like Delta Sigma sound or R2R sound or something like that, because this one, again, kind of breaks the mold. It's R2R that doesn't necessarily sound R2R, all that. So because I have this counter example right in my hand, like, I am usually very careful to put qualifiers and say things like stereotypical R2R sound or some, things of that nature. Okay, so that's a unique feature of this grouping, though. Like, you still do get some of the benefits of the R2R in there. It's just a little bit more forward and aggressive sounding kind of a DAC. It's also a little bit narrower in its soundstage, but it still has great holography within that soundstage. Anyway, this one has a bunch of helpful features on it, like you can do crossfeed. It's got a headphone output there, so you can do crossfeed from the headphone output. It has variable output, so you can use it as a preamp if you want. It can decode some higher sampling rates, up to 384 kilohertz, I think. I should have mentioned that about the Mojo too, because I think that one goes up to 768. Okay, so you get some upsampling capability. If you want to use an external upsampler, I should say, you get that capability you can use with this as well. This one has a BNC coax input if you need that, and so forth. It's also just a compact and light form factor that does not take up a bunch of desk or rack space. And I also like this one. I mean, we'll talk the sonic comparisons a little bit here in a moment, but I mean, it just has a unique aesthetic to it with that like sea green color and that sort of thing. And again, it's just, yeah, it's light. It's a good unit, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about its sonic attributes here in just a moment. All right, the most expensive one in this grouping here is this Black Ice Audio Glass FX. Now this one is unique in that it has a vacuum tube output stage. Okay, and so what happens here is there is a Delta Sigma DAC chip in here, which I believe is a Cirrus Logic, if I'm not mistaken. It's either that or it's a Burr Brown. Those might be the same thing anymore. Anyway, I'd have to look that up. Point is, Delta Sigma DAC for the output goes through vacuum tubes and all of that. So this one has a smoother presentation that even though it's a Delta Sigma chip, chip-based DAC, like it has a smoother, more R2R-like presentation, so to speak, and all of that. The tone and the timbre of it can also be impacted with tube rolling, so you get some tweaking flexibility on this one because of that. It also has some very basic streaming capability because there is a rather simple built-in streamer that is compatible with things like AirPlay and what is it? UPnP, okay, I think is the correct acronym there. All of that. So, I mean, fairly basic. It doesn't do rune streaming or anything like that, but you can use DLNA and that sort of thing with it. I found that to be a little bit cumbersome, but it is there, okay? And you can use it if you want. Okay. So those are kind of like the, you know, just kind of the overview of like the ergonomics, the features, and all of that. Let's talk about the sonic comparisons because I think that is ultimately what you are here for. In terms of all-around performance, my ranking and my preferences here, in terms of just sonics, the best all-arounder here, it's going to go in order of price. It would be the Glass FX as number 1, then the DAC1421, then the Mojo 2. Okay? And why do I say that here? I think the Glass FX has the best combination of detail retrieval / resolution, soundstage holography, so imaging, separation, that sort of thing. Usually the most accurate tone and timbre to it, though you can tweak that a little bit with tubes. Okay, and that sort of thing. And so those like kind of 3 areas combined to me are the ones where it just sounds the most realistic and the most natural most of the time. The one area it might fall off just a little bit where the other 2 are stronger is in the dynamics, the impact of the sound. You can increase and decrease the amount of dynamic impact and physicality in the Black Ice. Using tube rolling, you can find tubes that are a little bit more impactful, but it's just a little bit more relaxed and laid back and smooth in its nature. It just is that way. I think the headphone output on the Black Ice, which I should have talked about earlier, is also pretty good, and it's got the best headphone amp in it of these 3 if you want to use any of these as an all-in-one unit as well. Okay. Next being the Socris here, like this one, it has a very neutral sound signature to it, but the presentation is a little bit more forward and aggressive. But I think where the R2R nature of it still shows up sonically is that it never really sounds like etched or edgy to me, like sometimes a not well implemented Delta Sigma DAC can sound. Like there's still that smoothness to it, so it's still aggressive and forward and a little bit detail forward and all of that, not more resolving. Like there's not more details here than the Black Ice pulls out, but they're just presented in a little bit more forward and aggressive manner that makes them stand out a little bit sometimes. But again, it's not overwhelming, and there's still a smoothness to it to kind of balance that out that I think probably comes from the R2R nature. The other thing that this one does very well is it has a more lively and dynamic, energetic kind of sound than the Black Ice does, and it is definitely more impactful in the sub bass. So it rumbles a little bit more and it hits a little bit harder in the true low end there, okay, over that. But again, it's a little bit narrower in its sound stage, but it still has very tightly controlled imaging and separation. If you are a fan of Violectric's HPA V200 series headphone amps, these Socrus DACs, and the 1421 is one of them, synergize really well with that headphone amplifier line, because sometimes that V200 series soundstage can get a little bit exaggerated in its size and can get just a little bit sloppy in terms of its imaging and separation. Not big problems, but it's, you know, noticeable in comparison to others. But these Socrus DACs really help rein that in and get that under control from that line of amplifiers. So that's something to consider there if you like Violectrics and all of that, that these Socrus pair really well with that. Okay, the aggressive and forward nature of this one also means that it pairs with like smoother and thicker kinds of amps. Like if you have a dark voice or like some additions of the bottlehead crack and that sort of thing, like that can pair really well with this. The Urzatich Perfidus is also another really good match because that's like a warmer, thicker sounding kind of amplifier as well. All right. The Mojo 2 kind of occupies a similar sonic space to the Socrus insofar as it's, again, a little bit more forward, a little bit more energetic, and a little bit more aggressive in its sound. It's also like quite neutral if you leave all of the EQ options off of it and that sort of thing. It also does a pretty good job with the imaging and the separation and all that. It's going to stage bigger than the Socrus, maybe not quite as big as what the Black Ice is capable of with good tubes in it, but it's going to be on the bigger side of the staging. The tone and the timbre is also pretty good and all of that. Where this one I think falls behind the other two to a noticeable degree is in the resolution / the detail retrieval aspect. And it's subtle, but it is noticeable on when you connect it to most other amps or you just directly power headphones or that sort of thing. There's not quite as much texturing to the sound from the Chord as there is from these other two. Now, it is the cheaper unit, so that's not incredibly surprising. Okay, but like if I can like make an analogy here, it's like the sound that you get, the individual tones, like the sound of a string or the hit of a drum or like the playing of a piano key or something like, you know, anything like that, the individual sounds and tones themselves don't have quite the amount of detail and texture to them that it does from these other two. The analogy that I would make, we'll use a visual one, is like, this is like painting with flat paint, whereas the other two are more like eggshell. There's just a little bit more to each individual sound. There's just a little bit more going on there from a texturing standpoint, all that, than there is from the Mojo 2. The Mojo 2 is far from poor in that regard. It's just when I compared it to these other two directly, that was standing out to me as just like the individual sounds were just a little bit more monolithic, less detailed, less textured than with the other two. All right, so that's a start here on these comparisons. Like, where do these things stack up, generally speaking, with their balanced cousins, okay, out there on the market, or their balanced competition, I should say. The Socrus and the Black Ice here absolutely compete with the top rung of these $500 to $1,000 DACs out there on the market. To me, its competitors on the balanced side in terms of all around, their competitors, I should say, on the balanced side in terms of all around performance would be the Denafrips Aries 12th Anniversary Edition and the Schiit Bifrost 2/64. These two and those two, I think, have really separated themselves from the pack in the $500 to $1,000 market in terms of all around sonic performance and all of that. They just, all four of those sound really good. The Mojo 2 to me is kind of on par sonically with something like an SMSL DO300 and maybe not quite there with the 4493 version of the Gishelli Labs J2S with the Sparkos op amps in it. Okay. That still means that it sounds very good because those other two that I mentioned are very fine sounding DACs in their own right. It's just not quite up there with these other two or with the Bifrost 2 or with the Aries 12th Anniversary Edition in terms of just raw sound quality. However, again, the use cases that this thing can cover and its like system building flexibility as a result of that, it just cannot be ignored. Like the value on this can be pretty staggeringly high when you think about first the performance that it does offer, which is still good. Don't get me wrong, it's still very good. Okay, but then also just like you can use it on the go, you can use it in a desktop, you can use it on a 2-channel system and all of that in one device. Okay, lots of value in this little box. All right. So what's going to happen in the future then, because I hope I've answered some questions about these 3 DACs, about the single-ended DACs, why they're important, why we need them in the market, how they stack up to each other, how they stack up to others, other competitors on the balance side and all of that. What's going to be coming out hopefully soon is there will be at some point, and I can't promise exactly when, because the challenge of doing these kinds of videos is that sometimes the market moves so fast that by the time I'm ready to publish something, SMSL and topping and all of that, or like Gishelli released a new one and all of that, just they released something that I've got to get in there. Okay, so like I need to hear the Gishelli Labs 4499 version of the J2S. And topping just dropped the D90 Mark III, I think, something like that, that I should hear and try to get in there. So at some point, hopefully, fingers crossed in the near future, I can get those in here. Then we can have a balanced DAC competition on this. And then also sometime after that, we'll just look at the whole market of these and those all together in a more complete way. Fingers crossed I can make all of that happen. All right. But for now, thanks for watching my comparison of these 3 single-ended DACs. Again, the Black Ice Audio Glass FX, the Socris DAC1421, and the Korg Mojo 2. I hope that the information in this video, as well as the individual reviews that I have for these 3, help you make an informed buying decision about what DAC is right for you and your system. All right. If you have not liked this video yet, please do so. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Leave a comment down below. And check out my PayPal and my Patreon. And as always, enjoy the music.